Top of the morning to you and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines. Russian court hears case against Ukrainian soldiers accused of terrorism offenses. Don't underestimate NATO's daunting air defense exercises. U.S. Air Force in Germany warned. Plus, African leaders head to Ukraine and Russia on peace mission. Welcome to the program, and thank you so much for joining us. A Russian court in Rostov-on-Don has started hearing on cases against Ukrainian military personnel. The military court held 2 hearings with over 20 people, including women, seen in the defendant's cage. The Ukrainian personnel, including supposed fighters of Azov regiment, are accused of terrorist activity and participation in a terrorist organization and could face up to 20 years in jail. Russia says that it protects Russian-speaking people in Ukraine and that the West is using Ukraine to wage war against Russia. That narrative is rejected by Kiev and the West, which say Ukraine is fighting for survival against an imperial land grab by Russia. Russian missile attacks, which took place about 24 hours ago, killed 3 people in the Black Sea city of Odessa. According to officials in Ukraine, the 3 killed in Odessa were in a retail chain warehouse that was set ablaze during an attack that also damaged a business center, an educational institution, a residential complex, and shops. The residential section of a multi-purpose complex could be seen with a large hole in the wall on several upper floors with a damaged McDonald's restaurant nearby. The military spokesperson said 6 people had been injured in the building after an air battle took place. Ukraine's Air Force claims it has destroyed 3 Russian missiles and 9 drones during the overnight strike, the latest launched by Russia since its full-scale invasion in February 2022. Ukrainian police released dramatic footage on Wednesday showing a woman being pulled alive from under rubble. Police say the woman and man were rescued from a building destroyed by Russian strikes on the area during a rescue operation that lasted several hours. Pavlo Krylenko, governor of the Donetsk region, said 2 people had been killed in the city of Kramatorsk and 1 in the industrial city of Kostyantynivka. Odessa was perhaps the most cosmopolitan city of the Tsarist Empire and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Now, the Black Sea port felt more connected to the Mediterranean and the Atlantis than the mainland. Its founder was Russian, the Russian Empress Catherine the Great. Its first governor was a French aristocrat, and its population consisted of Orthodox Russians, Ukrainians and Moldovans, Muslim Tatars, and Ashkenazi Jews. They mostly communicated in Russian and still do, despite a universal animosity towards Moscow and its actions. Odessa was a conduit of international trends, from Argentinian tango and American jazz music to French fashion, and its cultural melting pot spawned entire genres of music and literature. The largest air deployment exercise in NATO's history, involving 25 nations and 250 aircraft, should not be underestimated. These are the words of the U.S. Air Force in Germany, whose American military officials praised Germany's supporting role in the Air Defender 2023 drill, calling it a phenomenal job. They were speaking at a U.S. air base. Wednesday's media day saw the takeoff of U.S. Air Force F-16 fighter jets based in that base and air drills by F-35 jets belonging to Vermont's Air National Guard.
The scope and scale of this exercise cannot be underestimated. The logistical challenges of trying to connect 18 different countries with hundreds of aircraft over numerous bases to bring air power to a single point in space to achieve a specific objective is daunting. And the German Air Force has done, in my opinion, in our opinion in Vermont, a very professional job. We're 2 days into the exercise, but thus far it's running very, very smoothly.
The GAF, the German Air Force, has done a phenomenal job supporting all of the unique communications and classification requirements. In fact, we have 24/7 German Air Force IT support to enable constant mission planning and debrief capability, which is really where we gain the most insight, is when we have our mission planning cell the day prior. After execution, we need the ability to evaluate our success, and that debrief capability is critical. So the German Air Force support, having the IT team here, is been, I think, the high point of this integration.
A senior commander of Russia's Chechen forces fighting Ukraine has been wounded. Russia's Defense Ministry television channel Vesta reported this on Wednesday, citing the press service of the State Duma lower house of parliament. The man named Adam Dalimkhanov, who is a member of the Duma as well as commander of the Chechen division of the Russian National Guard, is widely seen as the region's second most senior official behind Ramzan Kadyrov. In a message posted on Telegram, the leader of the Chechen Republic, Kadyrov, wrote that he could not contact Dalimkhanov and asked for help finding his dear brother. Dalimkhanov, a former Chechen separatist who eventually switched sides to Moscow, along with much of the region's leadership, had taken a prominent role in Russia's military campaign in Ukraine, commanding Chechen forces in Mariupol in the conflict's early days. Now, Ukrainian media had earlier on Wednesday reported that Dalimkhanov had been killed in an artillery strike in southern Ukraine. The Kremlin is warning that Russia's goodwill cannot last indefinitely when it comes to renewing the Black Sea grain deal. This comes a day after President Vladimir Putin said that Moscow was considering withdrawing from the accord. The deal allowing Ukraine to resume seaborne grain exports was brokered by the United Nations and Turkey in July last year to help tackle a global food crisis the UN said had been exacerbated by Europe's deadliest conflict since World War II. Moscow agreed reluctantly to extend the deal, known by the diplomats as the Black Sea Grain Initiative, until July the 17th on condition that it also receives help with its own food and fertilizer exports. President Putin is expected to discuss the future of the grain deal with African leaders in Russia on June the 17th. The Russian leader has said that Moscow was ready to supply grain for free to the world's poorest countries. Earlier on Wednesday, the Kremlin said President Putin had discussed supplies of grain, fertilizer, and fuel during a phone call with Mali's interim leader. Several Ukrainian grain terminals along the Kakhovka reservoir shore have become inoperable after the breach of the dam downstream on the Dnieper River more than a week ago. The director of the grain terminal, Alexei Madrak, is concerned that the water level of the reservoir has dropped 5 meters and does not believe levels will be restored anytime soon. In normal times, ships will carry grain from Nebel & Company silos by the reservoir down the river to a main grain terminal from where the grain was exported abroad. Since Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, the company has instead been transporting the grain from its silos via railway. Now, the breach of the Kakhovka Dam, which unleashed a torrent of water and drained that reservoir, has further put into question whether the terminal and others like it will be able to operate in the river again. A group of African leaders is expected to arrive in Poland today on their mediation mission in the Russia-Ukraine war. This information was released by Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni in a statement. According to him, in the statement on Twitter, in his words, "I was supposed to have joined them. I have now sent an official message that on account of my continued coronavirus status, I cannot join the group. He added that 6 African presidents from Comoros, Egypt, South Africa, Senegal, Republic of Congo, and Zambia are supposed to arrive in Poland today to take the train trip to Kiev to mediate in the Russia-Ukraine war. The African leaders want to persuade Ukraine and Russia into talks that could end the war. Last week, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa spoke with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, over the phone and briefed him about the African leaders' peace mission. He says President Putin has welcomed the initiative by African heads of state and expressed his desire to receive the peace mission, a statement from Ramaphosa's office last week. We now speak to researcher, Institute for Security Studies in Pretoria, South Africa, Mr. Dennis Riva. It's good to have you with us this morning.
Good morning. Good to be here.
For those that are skeptical of the results of this visit of these African leaders, whether or not they have the goodwill or the weight behind them to sway any sorts of decision on the part of President Putin or President Zelensky, what would you say to them, or would you agree?
I think it's definitely a good initiative. It's a good way to start the discussions, but I don't believe that these discussions will end in any productive results when it comes to ending the war and achieving any peace agreement. Unfortunately, as it stands right now, the positions on peace, these sort of the prerequisites for peace for Russia and Ukraine are completely different. And there is still no sort of joint points where Russia and Ukraine could meet and agree. So it's a good first step. It's a good initiative, but I don't believe it will end in any success whatsoever. Unfortunately, Russia would not agree to a deal which would go against its interests in Ukraine. Ukraine would not agree to any deal that would compromise its national sovereignty or would see secession of any of the provinces of Ukrainian currently occupied provinces. Hence, I think the most we can expect out of this deal is perhaps a continuation of the grain deal, which is currently being threatened by Russia. Perhaps certain breakthroughs can be achieved in that regard, but I wouldn't expect much otherwise.
In other words, you don't think they'd listen much to sway their opinions. Why then did President Putin say he welcomes the initiative? And why then did Sergei Lavrov was here about 2 weeks ago, up to last week, I believe, as well as the Ukrainian diplomatic representative on Africa, if they will not listen to Africa?
No, I think most definitely both sides would be welcoming the delegation. Both sides would be willing to listen to Africa. However, as I mentioned, any peace deal would require concessions either from Russia or Ukraine, and neither side right now is ready to make these concessions, and the positions are very strong on both sides. We're seeing right now that Russia, once again, there's mention of the grain deal and the withdrawal from the grain deal from the Russian side. And I'm sure this will play into the messaging around the peace deal, because food security is a major concern for African states, and I'm sure food security will be discussed during these meetings. But I think both sides, Russia and Ukraine, are willing to be perceived as open to negotiations, and neither side would outright come out and say that they are against these peace discussions. But at the same time, we have to be realistic about the situation right now. Ukraine has just launched its counteroffensive. It would be highly unlikely that Ukraine would now seize the counteroffensive or pull back the forces. And of course, neither side is ready to genuinely reach an agreement at this stage in time. But nobody said that results have to come out of this deal immediately. Perhaps this can be the first step in a long or medium-term process that would result in a peace deal, and African states would play a role in this regard.
Yes, we certainly hope it will yield a lot of fruit, and it's definitely encouraging to see that both sides are willing to accept this mediation attempts by Africa. But looking further afield to countries like France and Turkey, who have, well, Turkey right now definitely has the air of Russia, but before the war and possibly a few months ago, France also was trying to mediate in this conflict. And as far back as before the conflict started, French President Emmanuel Macron actually visited Moscow, and he sat down with President Putin, and he tried to bring him on board to stop the invasion when the troops were being amassed along the border. But now France has taken a U-turn, and France is now actively supporting Ukraine against Russia. What do you think informed this decision of French President Emmanuel Macron to do such an about-turn that other countries such as Turkey have not done, meaning that Russia will obviously be hurt by their position, meaning it's more difficult for them to speak to Russia as far as mediation?
Well, I think France and Turkey are in very different positions, even though both countries are members of NATO. France is also a member of the European Union, and of course, as such, would also have to account for the interests of other European Union members and countries, including the Eastern European ones. To be fair to France, their position has been cautious, if not overly cautious, when it comes to Russia. They've been trying to find a diplomatic agreement from the start of the war, with numerous phone calls between Macron and Putin at the start of the war, a move that has been criticized by other European countries and Ukraine itself. But I think at this stage, as a European Union member, as a NATO member, it would be difficult for France to take any other position other than the position they've taken right now. But when it comes to Turkey, however, Turkey plays a very dynamic role in the region. It's a big regional player in the Middle East, Black Sea region. They play an important role in Turkey. They see themselves as an important Black Sea player. So in that regard, I think Turkey has positioned themselves very cleverly in such a way where they have avenues to talk to Russia, but they can also talk to Ukraine. They can talk to other NATO members. In that regard, they are perceived as a much more credible partner and an avenue and a venue for peace negotiations. We've seen previously at least 2 meetings between Russian and Ukrainian delegations in Istanbul, I believe. So that would be the main difference. I don't think France can play this role anymore, but Turkey certainly can continue to play this role.
Mr. Riva, wasn't NATO formed after World War II as a deterrence to those sorts of things happening again in the future? And now that they're having these very significant operations and exercises, are they trying to send a message to anyone?
You're referring to the German exercises, I believe. Certainly, it is meant to send a message. Aside from the fact that, of course, what is happening is you're bringing, I believe, more than 15 countries together into one country, and coordinating this sort of tremendous exercise is a great opportunity to test interoperability between different forces. It is a great opportunity to learn from each other. It's as just in general, it is a very good initiative when you have such a large military alliance, because coordination is always a challenge between different forces. And the idea is that NATO member states need to be well coordinated and need to know how to work with each other. But of course, again, it is also a show of strengths to I believe, Russia, but also other countries, but primarily Russia. to show the unity of NATO members and to show the capability of NATO members. I think it's also important to know that before the war started, a lot of people tend to forget that NATO has been a dormant organization. Many member states of NATO have questioned the need for continued existence of this alliance. Germany was one of them, criticized by President Trump at the time for not committing to the alliance. So what we're seeing now is not just an impressive show of force, it is also an indication that NATO members are taking this seriously, they're taking the alliance seriously, and they're ready to cooperate and engage as part of this organization.
It's very important what you just mentioned. Finally, so you see this as, this in a way has been, well, not to say in a negative way, I mean, in a roundabout way, has been seen like a resurgence of the importance of NATO.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fair to say that NATO has been struggling to find its purpose before the war in Ukraine started. And what happened after the start of the war is that a number of NATO member states in Eastern Europe felt threatened, and they started raising the alarm about the potential implications if, at the time it was believed, if Ukraine were to fall to Russian forces, who would be next, what would happen next, which prompted previously neutral countries like Finland and Sweden to search for membership in NATO, but also for existing members of the NATO to increase their spending, increase the production of weapons, and increase cooperation across the board. So most certainly we're seeing a resurgence of NATO. We're seeing higher importance being given to NATO meetings, and we're seeing more interest in this organization, with obviously Sweden and Finland, well, Sweden not yet, but Finland, the newest member. We're seeing exercises. This is not the first exercise of NATO this year. We're seeing the deployment of troops and the movement of troops, training, cooperation. We can most certainly say that NATO is finding its second life and being reinvigorated in light of the invasion of Ukraine.
Indeed, like a phoenix. Thank you, Mr. Riva, for your insight. Mr. Dennis Riva, a researcher, Institute for Security Studies, who joined us from Pretoria in South Africa.
Thank you for having me.
Still ahead, Wagner chief Prigozhin rebuffs Putin's demand for fighters to sign defense ministry contracts. More details, please join us again. Welcome back to our coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Russian mercenary chief Yevgeny Prigozhin has reiterated his Wagner fighters' refusal to sign contracts with the defense ministry a day after President Vladimir Putin says the agreements were needed. In a rare direct show of defiance towards the Russian leader, Prigozhin said in his words, "None of the Wagner's fighters is ready to go down the path of shame again. That's why they will not sign the contracts." In a televised meeting on Tuesday, President Putin backed a call by the Defense Ministry for volunteer fighters in Ukraine to sign contracts with the country's military command, widely seen as a means to assert control over Wagner. Putin, however, stressed that contracts were necessary to allow all participants in Russia's campaign in Ukraine to receive the social support payments to which they are entitled. These include compensation to fighters if they are wounded and to their families if they are killed in action. Now, Prigozhin has waged a bitter public feud with Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and the army top brass since last year, accusing them of failing to provide adequate support and ammunition to Wagner forces in Ukraine and so causing them to suffer higher casualties. In Wednesday's remarks, however, he says he thought a compromise solution will be found between President Putin and Parliament to enable Wagner fighters to receive both social guarantees and certified status as combatants. Satellite images show the cooling pond at Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant before and after the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam The cooling pond is used to keep the plant's 6 reactors from potentially disastrous overheating. The Kakhovka Reservoir was normally used to refill the pond, but cannot do so now because of its falling water level. Instead, the pond, which is separated from the reservoir, can be replenished using deep underground wells. The water levels in the pond appear to be stable in satellite imagery from Maxar Technologies on June the 8th, 2 days after the destruction of the dam. The U.S. says that its military has sent F-22 Raptors to the Middle East in response to Russia's alleged unprofessional behavior. The Raptors were deployed from Langley Air Force Base, Virginia's 84th, that is 94th Fighter Squadron. The statement said while in the CENTCOM area, the 94th Fighter Squadron will integrate with coalition forces on the ground and in the air. CENTCOM Commander General Eric Kurilla said Russian forces' unsafe and unprofessional behavior is not what was expected from a professional air force. According to him, their regular violation of agreed-upon airspace deconfliction measures increases the risk of escalation or miscalculation. He added that the rapid deployment and integration into coalition operations is a clear demonstration of the commitment shared by partners, allies, and the U.S. to long-term peace and stability in the region. Germany announced its first national security strategy yesterday, calling Russia the biggest threat to Europe and warning about growing rivalry with China as Beijing tries to use its economic might to achieve political goals. The document provides an overview of Berlin's foreign policy, which has shifted towards prioritizing security more over economic interests in the year and a half since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It also addressed threats from climate change to supply chain disruptions. The plan also aims to ensure a more cohesive cross-ministry approach to security. Although the government was unable to agree on the creation of a National Security Council due to disagreements within Scholz's three-way coalition over where it should be housed. One of the few specific pledges made in the strategy refers to military preparedness. Days after Russia's invasion in February 2022, Scholz made a speech heralding a turning of an era in which he says Germany, from now on, will invest more than 2% of economic output on defense after years of resisting pleas from NATO allies to do so. We're now joined by public affairs analyst Mr. Oluseyi Adeyemo, who joins us from Lagos here in southwest Nigeria. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you, Olumide. I'm glad to be here.
Let's begin with the mercenary chief, Yevgeny Prigozhin's refusal to sign the defense ministry contracts, bringing the Wagner group under the defense ministry of Russia. Now, there's nothing in Yevgeny's background, at least in the public domain, that suggests he has any military experience or training whatsoever, from wanting to be a ballet dancer as a young man to being a restaurateur and dabbling in various sorts of businesses, and then turning out to be this Wagner chief after having first denied that he was associated with the leadership of the group. You find this man at this juncture being able to speak in such a way and violating even some of Russia's censorship laws in the way he addresses these military matters in public. Is this, how much do you think, if it is at all, harming the Russian invasion?
First of all, whenever you have somebody that is in the trenches, the person over time grows certain muscles that you never thought the person could grow. Now, you've had somebody who has done this as business. He's gone around, he's fought, he's fighting. Now, he has a team, and like I said, this is business for him. And so he would be bold. He has been emboldened by the fact that he needs to protect his business and ensure that his followers, his troops, trust him. And so whatever decision he needs to take, now, all the history and all the stories before him are not the reason why he takes decisions now. The reason why he takes the decision he takes now is based on the fact that he needs to ensure that his bread and butter is protected. Yes, it's clear that Russia needs them. I mean, Russia is being careful. Like we all know, Russia never planned for this protracted war. In their mind, it was something they were going to be able to do in 72 hours. And they're better off, using Wagner, because then they are dispensable. You can just use them, and at the end of the day, it will not matter. It will not matter too much if, for whatever reason, they're able to take them out in course of this war, because Russia also must protect its economic empire. They must be able to justify what they're doing right now by not affecting the economy and the people of Russia, significantly. So this man understands all this politics, and so he needs to also protect himself and his troop as well. And essentially, that is what he's doing.
Staying with him, it's relatively easy to be fair, to criticize Russia's methods in its military operations, as it calls it, of the Russia invasion, as the rest of the world calls it, because of the association. For instance, with Prigozhin, he was a former convict. He's described as a friend of President Putin. When he was a restaurateur, he actually served President Putin. I don't know whether he was a chef that cooked, but he was in charge of the cuisine of the day. And he's been seen with President Putin in public places prior to this war. Now that they've relied on him so much, also not to forget the fact that he's also wanted by the FBI. I think he has a $250,000 bounty on his head by the FBI. So he'll do well not to leave Russia or be found in places where he could be arrested internationally. But that is the person that President Putin is depending on to advance their military interests. So it's harder for people on the outside who are neutral looking in to say, okay, maybe they have a point here. But in using President Putin using Yevgeny, has he created a monster? Will Wagner Group turn out to be a liability rather than an asset?
Now, if we look at this historically, anywhere in the world, even with us in Nigeria, whenever you put some group of people together and use them as they're being used right now, most often, if you don't find a way of dispensing of them yourself, you have emboldened them, you have empowered them, and naturally, for them, they need to continue to survive. And so I want to believe that President Putin has a plan for post-war, how he's going to deal with them. But truth of the matter is, like he's always said, everything is fair in the war or in war. So this man needs to protect himself, he needs to protect his troop. Putin needs to be careful the way he, sort of manages this war, such that he doesn't suffer too much casualty, so that at the end of the day, he can still justify. Because at the end of the day, they still have a life to live after this war, economy and all that. So he's created somebody that he wants to use. The person is human, he's not a computer. You can't just turn him on and turn him off. So, like I said, he also needs to fend for himself and his troop. He needs to also think of post-war. He needs to think of after now. And that is what is playing out. At the end of the day, this should be lesson to all of us. When you're employing and deploying certain people to do certain assignment for you, particularly this kind of assignment, you also must be cautious what you do, because at the end of the day, when this is all over, they also have a plan to leave after this time, and they definitely will do whatever they can whilst they fight for you and justify their employment and deployment. They also need to also protect and cater for themselves and their future.
Mr. Adeyemo, the African Peace Mission, I believe, is right now in either Ukraine or to go to Russia, trying to mediate in this plan. The giant of Africa, as we're called, Nigeria, seems to be absent. I don't know if there's a representative. Certainly the president isn't there to represent Nigeria's interests. Does this say anything in our foreign relations, given that we have both embassies in Nigeria, and not to talk of our Russian relations and our Ukrainian relations, though we have officially supported Ukraine and gone against the Russian invasion. But does this say anything?
Olinda, you know, we had this kind of discussion the last time we spoke, and I said to you that we'll be deluding ourselves if we still claim that we're still leaders of Africa today. Yes, we have all that it takes. We're naturally the leaders, but truth of the matter is, in one way or the other, we're re-merged in our, and I think people all over the world will excuse us because they feel that we're dealing with certain internal problems now that needs to be decisively dealt with, and they're saying maybe we should just allow them. But truth of the matter is, we have vacated our position, and we're definitely preoccupied with several internal problems that right now the leadership role that we used to play, and we played in Liberia when we stood and looked in the eyes of America and all of those, we're not playing right now. The ECOWAS or the ECOMOG leader that we were, we're definitely not today. That is the truth. So I'm not surprised personally that we're not at the forefront, or we're not even part of this delegation. So that is the reality. That's where we are right now. One is hoping that as we clear our table and do the right thing, we would then assume our rightful position as leaders of Africa. But the truth is today, we're not.
We can totally understand why President Tinubu is not there, even if he wanted to be there. He just resumed office yesterday, as far as everyone is concerned. But would it have been out of place to send a representative?
Like I said, I want to say that it seems like our hands are full. There's a lot to be repaired. There's a lot to be fixed. And I think as a government, they're concentrating on that. I mean, every decision, every step they take right now must be carefully taken. They can't just rush into anything. We're beginning to see things we never thought were there. And I mean, it's shocking to all of us. And I think they also have seen things that we have not even seen. And they're kind of being careful what decisions they take. And if you ask me, right now is not the time to bother too much about external problem, because you have an internal problem. Like the Yoruba people say, you would also have to deal with home before you go out, because it is from home that you take out your beauty or your whatever you, I mean, sure, I don't know how to describe it, but you would have to deal with your own problem before you go out there to deal with outside problems. So yes, we are going to naturally take over if we do well in cleaning up our table. But as it is right now, I would also prefer that we deal with our internal problem first, so that we can be properly prepared to start to play our role in the external space. Yeah, well, it's been called physician, heal thyself before you try and heal someone else. But that's an entirely different idea. Now, looking at the counteroffensive that has begun, what's your impression? Do you think that Ukraine will make headway? I mean, truth of the matter is, it's still survival of the fittest. I mean, people have said they will never do counter. They will not go on the offensive, but it's impossible. I mean, even in football, it is said that the best way to protect yourself, I think, is maybe the best way to play defense is offensive. So there's no way you will continue to protect your home and not have cause to go on the offensive, particularly when you see that there's an opportunity to, you will naturally want to take it. Yes, everybody is playing on, cautiously, the US in supporting and saying, no, we don't want them to go on the offensive. They are also claiming that they're not going on the offensive. But you and I know that there's no way you would continue to defend your home without, in one way or the other, doing one or two offensive moves. So yes, we would all say that I'm not one of those who is rejoicing that Ukraine is winning in any way, but it is clear that Russia never planned for this, and they are not winning as they thought they will win. They might not be losing, but they are not winning. And so I guess Ukraine is taking advantage of that, and then taking one or two steps on the offensive, and that's always welcoming. But like I said, at the end of the day, the person who wins is the one that is going to tell the story. So everything is allowed. Everything is permitted as long as you don't take a decision that will offend you at the end of the day. Whether it is to take them out softly here and there, I guess everything is allowed in war because at the end of the day, it is survival of the fittest.
Thank you for your perspective on the issue. Mr. Oluseyi Adeyemo, Public Affairs Analyst, who joined us from Lagos, for being on the program this morning.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. Thank you for the opportunity to share my views.
Still ahead, Red Cross visits rose on both sides of Ukraine war. Welcome back to the final stretch of Russian invasion of Ukraine. Thank you for being with us thus far. Exiled Belarusian opposition leader Svetlana Hinaskaya is calling on the global community to react strongly to Russia's deployment of tactical nuclear weapons to the country. The opposition leader said that Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko's statement announcing that the deployment has begun creates a serious threat to regional security and sets them on a dangerous path for nuclear escalation. It was added that the world must show Lukashenko and Putin that it won't give in to nuclear blackmail. President Lukashenko claimed that Belarus has already received some tactical nuclear weapons from Russia. In an interview with Kremlin propagandist Olga Skabieva, the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons has pushed back against the move, calling it dangerous and reckless in a tweet. Now, our business correspondent, Ini John Mekwa, joins us for the business implications of the conflict. Ini, good morning.
Good morning.
President Putin is meeting the African leaders to discuss the Russia-Ukraine grain deal as they also make their inputs on mediation to give their opinion on how they think both sides should deal with assuaging the conflict. Exactly. But concerning the grain deal, what do you think will be uppermost on President Putin's mind, which obviously he's been reiterating?
Yeah, obviously what would be uppermost on President Putin's mind would be, how do I benefit, how do I make the most, of this window, of this visit? And he's not been quiet about what Russia wants. It's been all over in conversations we've been having in the news and all of that. So to see if the African leaders would be able to make a difference, maybe make them reduce their demands or make the West accept some of their condition, that is yet to be seen. But it's important to know that there are about 7 of them. They're meeting on Saturday in St. Petersburg. And we have the South Africa president, we have the chair of African Union, we have the chair of Union of Comoros, we have the president of Congo, president of Uganda, president of Senegal, president of Zambia, no presidents of Nigeria there. Well, we have the AU there. I guess that covers a whole lot of country. And it's interesting to know.
I think we covered that. Even if President Tinubu wanted to go, I'm sure the president of Russia or Ukraine will say, please, you just got into power. Just saddle.
So I guess we are covered under the AU, yes. The African Union, and chair is representing a lot of countries there. But it's interesting to know that, Africa really needs this because from last year up to this year, since the war started, under this grain deal, Africa has taken about 625,000 tons of wheat only, just wheat. has come from Ukraine. So that shows you that Africa really needs it. Countries like Egypt. I mean, yesterday it was in the news that Egypt has had to, about more than $1 billion they have to set aside for food subsidy. And top on the list of that is wheat. So when wheat becomes more expensive, then it makes a mess of those subsidy programs, that they try to do, because it's a major staple for them. So this is an important meeting. And they're also meeting with President Zelensky, even before they meet with President Putin. But the one with President Putin is one that is hitting the news, because we do know that the demand comes majorly from Russia. And if Russia does not say yes to the deal that is supposed to expire in about a month, we might not see that deal again, and African countries will go back, especially countries like in areas like the Tigray and all of that, because some of these grains, which is one of the requirement that Russia had placed before now, I think that has been acceded to, is some of those grains have to get to the war-torn and the very poor, the poorest of the poor. Most of them are in those war-torn areas like Tigray and all of that, So these people are going to feel it a whole lot more if this grain deal is stopped. And that's why African leaders are taking the bull by the horn and going to see the major players in this grain deal, which is President Zelensky and President Putin.
China is continuing to support Russia. Now Russia issuing bonds in Chinese yuan.
Yeah, so we've been talking about de-dollarization, and we've seen BRICS. We talked about BRICS, the BRICS summit. The ministers met in South Africa, the major meeting. We don't know if President Putin will be going there, if they're going to move it to China and all of that. But, it's part of the effort of BRICS to de-dollarize the world so that the world is not depending so much on the dollar. They believe that, there should be alternative. There should be an alternative to SWIFT. The United States should not be the one, if the dollar sneezes, global oil, equities, everything, crypto, everything feels it. So that's what they're trying to do. And of course, Russia is leading that, especially because of the sanctions. So already, that they've had their assets frozen and their assets were in dollars. So now they're trying to, they have some deposits in yuan, their trade.
Issuing bonds, in the ruble before. Now it's added, okay.
Yeah, and in dollar.
In dollars, okay.
Yes, so now they're doing in yuan.
In yuan, okay.
Yeah, but they also have risks there, because one is not as stable or certain. It's not a global currency.
Yeah.
So that's what they've been warned. But we've seen them look for an alternative. They have some deposits, some of their reserve now in yuan. Now they're trading. They want to sell some bonds in yuan. And they do have some citizens move their savings from dollar to the yuan, at this time. So it seems their relationship with China is getting closer and closer. But of course, analysts have not been quiet on the risks, the possible that could happen there. If anything happens to that relationship, anything happens to the China economy. Remember then, even recently, they still had an outbreak of COVID that affected their data, their manufacturer, PMI, and all of that. And all of that will affect the value of the currency.
So if you want to support Russia surreptitiously and you don't want to buy in the dollar or the ruble, you can buy it in the yuan.
Yes. So you're investing your money in the Russian economy through the yuan.
Wow.
The yuan.
Thanks a lot, Ini. Our correspondent, Ini John Mekwe. Now, finally on the program, the Red Cross has visited 1,500 prisoners of war on both sides of the conflict in Ukraine, often sharing desperately longed-for news with their families. The International Committee of the Red Cross stressed the importance of such access and says these visits are vital for checking detention conditions, offering support, and sometimes books, hygiene items, and other personal necessities. It said they are also used to relay information between the prisoners and their loved ones. ICRC's Regional Director for Europe and Central Asia, Ariane Barr, says for the prisoners of war and their families who've been able to share their news, the impact is immeasurable. ICRC and its partners have so far delivered about 2,500 personal messages between prisoners of war and their families in the Ukraine conflict, and have also helped provide about 5,500 families with information on the fate of their loved ones. That's our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine this morning. Thank you for watching. I'm Illuminated Macaulay. Please join us again tomorrow and have a good day.